All right, everyone, good afternoon. We are right at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and start getting into the ministerial duties that I have to perform here today, starting with calling this virtual meeting of the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Planning Framework Technical Advisory Committee to order. As you know, I am your host, Matt Strickler, Secretary of Natural Resources and Chief Resilience Officer to Governor Northam, and it is great to see you all here today. Thanks for continuing to dedicate your time and talents to this important work. I'm very excited about all I've heard from the subcommittees, and I look forward to hearing those reports today. I also look forward to formally introducing you to our master plan contractor, who many of you all have met already. Dewberry, as you know, is already helping us move from a framework to a true master plan with the assistance of all of you in my office. I spoke with Governor Northam at the cabinet meeting on Monday about the progress we're all making. He's very encouraged by that, excited as well, and sends his regards and thanks to all of you for your work here. We've got a lot to do, so without further delay, I'll go ahead and start my spiel. As you know, generally, public bodies are prohibited from meeting electronically under the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act. However, emergency language approved by the Governor and General Assembly allows us to move forward with certain restrictions that I will outline below in a painfully lengthy monologue that you have all heard before. I apologize for that in advance, but it is necessary. Before I review those provisions, let me take just a moment to review how this meeting will work. We want to allow, of course, for participation by committee and subcommittee members, staff, and members of the public who wish to comment. However, it's essential that we are able to manage the conversation effectively. While this meeting will be open for committee comment, due to the challenges associated with the electronic meeting format, we want to allow members of the public to be heard as well. So if you would like to make a comment, please do so in the chat box, and our staff, Ms. Katie Salee, will be monitoring that chat box and will let us know when someone has submitted a comment, and we will address those comments as time allows. Please, everyone, just be patient with us as we work through this. We understand and appreciate all of the challenges of this format. Again, I've got to read a lengthy introduction for the virtual meeting, long but required, to be read aloud under Chapter 1289, the budget bill for all electronic meetings. So here we go. Chapter 1289 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly, also known as the budget bill, includes language addressing the ability of public bodies to conduct electronic meetings without the need for a quorum being present in a single physical location, otherwise known as an electronic meeting. This language was submitted as an amendment by the governor and approved by the General Assembly at the April 22, 2020 reconvened session. The governor subsequently signed the budget bill, and the bill was effective as of July 1, 2020 and remains in effect. The budget bill allows public bodies to hold electronic meetings when the governor has declared a state of emergency pursuant to Code of Virginia section 44-146.17 if, first, the nature of the declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location. Second, the purpose of the meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the public body in the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. The budget bill also has language regarding recordings and transcripts of electronic meetings. Please be advised that the meeting is being recorded. Recording will be available to the public through the Secretary of Natural Resources website. The comments in the chat room will also be preserved as a public record. Official minutes of this meeting will be drafted and posted in accordance with regular procedures. The minutes will also include the type of electronic communications means by which the meeting is being held, which, as you know, is WebEx. The budget bill does not allow the committee to hold an electronic meeting to discuss or transact business for any purpose at all. Rather, they may do so as long as the agenda items that the public body plans to take up are A, statutorily required, or B, necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. It is the committee's responsibility to determine whether, quote, the nature of the declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location, end quote. At the conclusion of my remarks, I will ask for a motion for the committee to make this determination. If that motion fails, which I certainly hope it will not, the electronic meeting will have to end at that point. The budget bill requires compliance with the provisions of Code of Virginia Section 2.2-3708.2. Therefore, in accordance with that code section, public bodies must include a telephone number that may be used to notify the public body of any interruption in the telephonic or video broadcast of the meeting. In the event that a disruption occurs, participants should contact staff, again, Ms. Katie Salee, by phone at 804-663-7489 or email katie.salee@governor.virginia.gov. Again, that phone number is 804-663-7489. Additionally, if there is an interruption in the broadcast, the meeting must be suspended until public access is restored. These provisions of the Virginia FOIA Act, not addressed in the budget bill, remain in effect. Before we continue with the business portion of the meeting, I will ask Rear Admiral Phillips to call the roll for the committee members to see if we have a quorum and anticipated staff. Other participants will be recorded through the chat window. If you're participating by phone and your name is not called, please contact, again, our staffer, Ms. Katie Salee, by phone at 804-663-7489 or email at katie.salee@governor.virginia.gov. In addition, if at any time you lose connection and are unable to reconnect, please contact Katie at the same number. I will now turn it to Rear Admiral Phillips for calling of the roll. Ann?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. All right, everyone, my signal's a little weak here, so we're going to do our best. First of all, Secretary Strickler.
Present.
Present. And I am present. Ms. Kimberly Kane, representing the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Mr. Carlos Rivera, Chief Data Officer.
I'm President.
Hello, Ms. Phillips. I typed in the chat that I was here. This is Kimberly King.
I know we do not have Mr. Curtis Brown attending, and we do not have Ms. Erin Sutton attending for VDEM. Do we have Mr. Robbie Coates attending from VDEM?
I'm here. This is Erin.
Thank you, Erin. And Community Development.
Present.
Thank you, Tracy. Do we have a representative from Virginia Resources Authority for Ms. Stephanie Hamlet?
This is Sean Crumlish, Stephanie Hamlet's designee.
Thank you, Sean. Do we have a representative from the Department of Environmental Quality?
Yes, this is David Paylor. I'm here.
Thank you, Director Paylor. Ms. Kathy McGee, Director of Research and Innovation, Virginia Transportation Research Council.
I'm here.
Mr. Randy Owen, Virginia Marine Resources Commission. Ms. Emily Steinhilber, currently coordinator for the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resilience at Old Dominion.
Here.
Dr. Mark Lugenbach, Virginia Institute of Marine Science.
Here.
Ms. Elizabeth Andrews, Director, Virginia Coastal Policy Center.
Present.
Dr. Robert Weiss, Director, Center for
Present.
Dr. Karen McGlathry, Director, Environmental Resilience Institute at the University of Virginia.
I'm present.
Commander, Norfolk District, Army Corps of Engineers. Colonel Pat Kinsman.
Present. I am
Thank you,
present.
Colonel. Director V. Grant.
Present.
Thank you, Troy. Mr. Robert Crum, Director, Hampton Roads Planning District Commission.
President Admiral Phillips, thank you.
Yes. Ms. Martha Heater. Ms. Martha Heater, Executive Plan RV.
Present.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Norm Goulet, representing the Northern Virginia Regional Commission.
Present.
Mr. Jerry Davis, Director, Northern Neck Planning District Commission.
John Bateman, designee, present.
Thank you, John. Ms. Elaine Mile, Executive Director, Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission. Mr. Louis Lawrence, Executive Director, Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission.
I'm here, thank you.
And do we have a representative for the the Greater Washington Regional Commission?
Yes, this is Denise Nelson.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise. Moving to invited TAC members. I believe I will call Dr. Robert Young. I believe he will join us later. Dr. Young?
Yes, I'm here.
Miss Ashley Montgomery? Hanbury?
Present.
Carl?
Dr. Carl.
And this is Kristen. Carl said that he would be late. He might be on around 1:30.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you. And I believe representing Ms. Gilbieri of the Nature Conservancy Virginia Coast Reserve, we have Susan Bates on the line today.
Hi,
Yes, I'm
this
here.
is Jill. I'm here. Susan will take over for me in
Thanks,
about
Jill.
40 minutes. Yep, thanks, Ann.
All right, thank you, Jill. Ms. Kristen Owen?
Present.
She's here. Dr. Jessica Whitehead, Director, Institute for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience at Old Dominion.
Present.
Thank you, Jessica. Dr. Stephen Murray, Virginia Economic Development Partnership.
Jason LKB here representing the ADP.
Thank you, Jason. Ms. Georgie Marquez. I know Georgie was TBD today. Mr. Joe Howell, representing Commander, Navy Region Mid-Atlantic. Mr. Reggie Tuppence, Tribal Administrator, the Upper Mattaponi Indian Tribe.
Present.
And Veterans and Defense Affairs.
Present.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Secretary, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Admiral Phillips. The next step is for me to present a recommended motion and wait for a board member to request the motion. The motion is as follows. The Technical Advisory Committee certifies that the nature of the declared COVID-19 emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the board to assemble in a single location. And further, that the agenda items to be taken up at this meeting are necessary to continue operations and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the board. Is there a motion from the committee?
I make a motion. This is Denise Nelson.
It's David Paler. I second it.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Director Paler. Admiral Phillips, will you please call the roll for the vote?
Yes, sir, I will. Secretary Matthew Strickler.
Aye.
Ms. Kimberly Kane. Mr. Carlos Rivero.
Aye.
Director Clyde Chrisman.
Aye, if you can hear me.
We can hear you. Thank you, Clyde.
Thank you.
Ms. Erin Sutton.
Aye.
Ms. Tracy Munyon.
Aye.
Mr. Sean Crumlish.
Aye.
Director David Paler.
Aye.
Director Catherine McGee.
Aye.
Mr. Randy Owen.
Aye.
Ms. Emily Steinhilber.
Aye.
Dr. Mark Lukenbach.
Aye.
Ms. Elizabeth Andrews.
Aye.
Dr. Robert Weiss.
Aye.
Dr. Karen McGlatherby.
Aye.
Colonel Pat Kinsman.
Aye.
Dr. Troy Hartley.
Aye.
Mr. Robert Crum.
Aye.
Ms. Martha Heater.
Aye.
Stewart is representing Martha. Oh, thank you. Mr. Norm Goulet.
Aye.
Mr. John Bateman.
Aye.
Ms. Elaine Mail.
Aye.
Mr. Louis Lawrence.
Aye.
Mr. Alec Brebner. Ms. Denise Nelson.
Aye.
Ms. Mary Carson Stiff.
Aye.
Ms. Ashley Montgomery.
Aye.
Ms. Jill Berry.
Aye.
Ms. Kristen Owen.
Aye.
Dr. Jessica Whitehead.
Aye.
Mr. Jason Alkubi.
Aye.
Mr. Joe Howell. Mr. Reggie Tuppence.
Aye.
Captain Tom Krabs.
Aye.
That completes the roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Great, thank you, Admiral Phillips. Again, I have just a little bit more preambulatory language to get through here, and then we can proceed. So let me just bang this out real quickly. I just want to explain a little bit further how we are going to handle participation by committee members, staff, and the public. Everyone, except for the individual presenting materials for an agenda item, will be muted. Once the presentation is completed, the committee members and only the committee members will be unmuted for discussion and may indicate their desire to comment by raising their hand or commenting in the chat box. Please do that. I am the worst offender about not raising my virtual hand, but it certainly makes the meeting run a lot more smoothly when folks do it. So please raise your hand. And if I don't raise my hand, chide me mercilessly. Staff will assist me with ensuring that committee members are recognized when they have questions or comments. I'll try to do my best to keep an eye on that as well. And as needed, staff will be unmuted to address questions or concerns. Members of the public, again, will be able to ask questions and provide input by utilizing the chat box function only. As time allows, we'll respond to those questions and comments in the chat function. Public comment will be taken from those who signed up in advance during the last signed up in advance during the last 20 minutes of the meeting. Okay, and we will now, at long last, proceed with the business of the committee as outlined in the agenda. The first item on the agenda is some updates on Technical Advisory Committee process, and I will turn it back over to Admiral Phillips for that piece. Ann?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Update so that we can get part of our agenda today. Thank you to all of you, to everyone who was a part of the subcommittees at large for your work over the past month or so since our last meeting. We've had a number of individual meetings with Dewberry and subcommittees. We have one left to go, and that is the Federal Partnership Subcommittee. We'll schedule that at their convenience in the next week or so. But we want to thank subcommittee chairs in particular for their participation in those meetings. We know it took a lot of extra time on your part. I'd also like to thank Dewberry, who's going to be with us today. Since they were announced in March, all this up and running very quickly, and it's taken quite a bit of time on their behalf, and back and forth between them and us, and we look forward to hearing from them today, and know you will want. As I move forward, I'd like to introduce two people. I'll just tell you by name so that you know part of the process now. Since our last TAC meeting, we have brought on board in the Department of Conservation and Recreation a program manager for the master plan. That's Mr. Matt Dallin, who's listening in on the call today, and also more recently, Mr. Connor Winstead has come on board to help work the planning processes. So you will see Mr. Dallin and Mr. Winstead in meetings as we move forward, certainly virtually and hopefully someday in person too. The other point I would like to make to subcommittees, because we get this question very often, is that the role of the subcommittees and the TAC is to advise the Commonwealth in doing analysis and review and vulnerability and risk assessments, among many other things which we're all aware of. The subcommittees are advising the Commonwealth. And I've had several people ask, are we required to have a report? Are we producing a document to put into the master plan? And I think our response to that is that the master plan will encompass the work of the subcommittees. It will encompass your advice. It will encompass your recommendations. But we're not asking for a book report at the end of this process, because this process doesn't end with this first iteration of the master plan. Your advice and counsel will be worked into the plan as we move forward in concert with the Commonwealth and with the support of Dewberry as our contractor. There are, of course, examples of specific requirements. The Strategic Coastal Relocation Handbook is one of them. The Science, Research, and Best Practices Subcommittee is working that particular aspect. That is a thing with a deliverable. We understand that. But in general, specific reports from subcommittees are not what we are particularly about or expecting from subcommittees. You may choose as you go through your processes to write a white paper or other documentation, and that's fine, but we're not looking for a book report. Just to clarify the advisory role of the subcommittees. Now, I think what we're here today, primarily, in addition to hearing from the subcommittees, is to hear from Dewberry about their work plan, about their processes, and to let them introduce their team. And so, in that, with that in mind, I'll turn this over to Mr. Dr. Brian Batten, who is the manager for this program, and he will introduce his team and then move forward with Dewberry presentation. At the end of their presentation, we'll take questions as you go along, or we will take them orally as we get to that point. So, without further ado, Brian, the floor is yours, sir.
All right. Hopefully you can see me and hear me. Do I have the right PowerPoint display up for everyone? Can I get a confirmation of that, please?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you. And thank you for the introduction. And it's our pleasure to be here today to provide an overview of our approach for the first Coastal Resilience Master Plan for the state of Virginia. I'll have to say personally, and on the behalf of our team, we're very excited about supporting the Commonwealth on this critical effort. And we really look forward to working with all of you through the process. Today, we've structured a presentation to give you an overview of who our team is and our team members. We want to go through an overview of our technical approach for the study, and then we have reserved some time for some question and answers at the end for the members of the TAC. So up front, we want to introduce our team. I am the project manager of the Dewberry team, and Dewberry, for those who aren't familiar with us, we are the prime contractor for this effort. We're a full service architecture engineering consulting firm headquartered in Virginia, and we bring over 40 years of experience in the risk response and recovery market, supporting a variety of national, state, and local level efforts. Our integrated resilience team, most of whom lives in the state of Virginia, is very excited about this project as it's their home state. There are some recent examples of their work, include some studies for the National Academies of Sciences, state of North Carolina, Rebuild by Design. We've helped the city of Houston recover from Hurricane Harvey and established and evaluated New York City's climate resilience design guidelines. We also have a long history of supporting flood resilience activities in the state of Virginia through a host of regional and local hazard mitigation plans, and most recently, leading Virginia Beach's sea level rise adaptation effort. We're bringing this body of experience, the lessons learned from those studies, the scales of those studies, and effective practices to process data for the purpose of this to support the Commonwealth in this effort. With that, I want to introduce our partner, the Water Institute of the Gulf, and I turn the floor over to Dale Morris to say a few words about their involvement here.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Dale Morris here, Director of Partnerships with the Water Institute of the Gulf, which is based in Louisiana, but we have staff spread across the United States, and we certainly work across various U.S. Gulf Coast states and East Coast states. The Water Institute is a technical applied not-for-profit research organization set up in 2011 to help the state of Louisiana manage all of the money that was coming towards it for research on protection and restoration post-Katrina and post-BP oil spill. We have numerous components within the Water Institute: physical system and numerical modeling, a geosciences department, a coastal ecology department, human dimensions department, and a policy and planning department. And briefly, again, we are based in Louisiana. We work across the U.S. And in fact, I live in Virginia, and this is very important to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Dale. We're also joined by 3 of our small business partners today. I want to introduce them one by one. Vision Planning Consulting is an emergency management, grants management, and public outreach consulting firm. They're represented here today by Deepa Srinivasan. Vision is planning outreach, they're our outreach lead for the Coastal Resilience Master Plan and also providing the administrative support of the TAC and the TAC subcommittees. We're also joined by GKY and Associates. I believe John Payne from GKY is on the phone with us today. They are providing technical support. Dewberry and GKY are in a formal small business mentor-protege relationship to the U.S. Small Business Administration, and they'll be providing additional technical support to our efforts here. And last but certainly not least, we have Delcino Miles and the Miles Agency on our team, and Delcino and our team have really deep ties to diverse stakeholders in the Hampton Roads region, and we look forward to how they can augment our outreach efforts with the execution of this plan. Moving on from that, I would take a quick moment just to introduce our speakers today. You've already heard from myself and Dale Morris. I want to quickly introduce Matt Mampara, who's our data analytics lead, Deepa Srinivasan, the outreach lead, as I mentioned earlier, Caroline Whitehead, who's leading our finance strategy, and Johanna Greenspan Johnston, who is our lead for development of the Coastal Master Plan document. Our challenge that we have in front of us is quite formidable. It's as the state's responding to the state's RFP, the ask is to develop the first Coastal Resilience Master Plan for the state of Virginia. We came on board about middle of March, and we're looking at a period of performance to complete this effort by November of this year. Our main deliverables are illustrated here, but they include identifying the data sources and the methods to accomplish the plan and inform the plan development, completing the coastal data analysis to support the plan, establishing the project database, and also the plan itself and some iterative revisions of that by November. And throughout that process, we'll be working to complete outreach and disseminate information to stakeholders. Our plan, our study plan, and how we'll approach trying to accomplish these goals is shown on this slide. And what I want to introduce you here on this slide are two things. One, the milestones we mentioned above live on this row of this table, and our main study tasks are down on this far left column. What we are doing here is we have almost an immediate start on most technical tasks given the very short period of performance, and we're progressing many of them in a parallel fashion as they're interdependent on each other. The key study tasks are the conceptual model, the flood hazard framework, an assessment of impacts to built to natural systems, looking at the project database and what new projects may need to be identified, a funding analysis, the master plan document, and finally outreach and public engagement throughout the study process. As we look to engage with the Commonwealth with ATTACK and carry out our technical execution of these tasks, we have a great starting place in the Coastal Master Planning Framework that was developed and put out by the state in October of 2020. And this defines a lot of the goals and objectives for specific tasks we're dealing with, but also more importantly, the guiding principles by which the state has identified they would like the study to be executed in light of. And I will paraphrase here, but these include acknowledging climate change, future conditions that will happen, and having informed decision-making based on those ideas, instilling equity into the coastal resilience efforts across the state, recognizing the value of natural systems and promoting a whole of community and regional planning approaches, and finally, prioritizing cost-effective solutions. So these are the items we want to keep in mind as we look to what we should consider as we establish our framework and work through it. Building on the Coastal Master Planning Framework, we've identified through a conceptual model process how we should progress the activities through the study, and these align very well with the technical tasks we showed before. But essentially what we want to do is start with the characterization of the hazard environment, including both today's and the future conditions that the state has outlined in the framework document. We want to use that information to understand the impacts on social, natural, and built systems within the state to have an even statewide assessment of those items. As we do that, we want to look out to the state, and there's been many great efforts already underway through the Coastal Zone Management Program with Wetlands Watch and the PDCs and the regional commissions to identify what projects are out there. We want to gather those up, create this database, and then as we get into task number 4, understand based on those guiding principles how to evaluate those projects in light of the impacts that we see, but also in light of the prioritization framework established. And finally, the last and really one of the most important pieces too is how can the state work across the various funding streams and work with the regions and the communities to help align funding sources and make some of these projects happen in the short and long term. As we work through all 5 of these elements, we are trying and working hard to identify opportunities to have outputs come out to the TAC subcommittees to where we can engage and gather feedback that will come back in and inform our efforts. And we also want to have engagement points with stakeholders and the public to disseminate some of the information and findings as we move through and raise awareness of this overall plan. And then last but not least here, we have a tight time frame, so we have to build the master plan and the database as we go. So as we complete each task, we'll be pulling that information out and incrementally building those products as we progress through the study schedule. The first step in our process of development of the conceptual model, and this can also be thought of as the analytical framework for the study elements. And what we do here is establish essentially what is a roadmap for the analytical elements of the study. We want to go through and identify the questions we feel we need to answer to deliver on the state scope and to consider the framework items that they have identified. And so as we look at each one of those pieces, we identify those questions. What are the needed data that we need to answer this? What are the metrics that we might use to measure it? How are other items dependent on those pieces? And are there questions here that need to be resolved either with the Commonwealth or TAC to inform our overall approach? And this is something we progress through, and we have a draft product that the state is reviewing and we are progressively revising. As we move on towards the flood hazard assessment, we want to consider both current and future conditions. And future conditions can many times, especially in the coastal environment, change what your priorities might be in terms of adaptation. And especially they can inform long-term needs that you need to recognize in the short term and plan for. We're looking at 4 scenarios that are identified in the framework document. So at current conditions, let's say the 2020s, the 2040s, 2060s, and 2080s. For each of those kind of timeframes, we are working to pull together a framework that will represent the full range of coastal flood conditions. So we know a key driver of adaptation action and need for that is the high frequency repetitive flooding that provides a lot of disruption to services and also recurrent impacts. We want to recognize that's a big issue and driver here. We want to make sure we represent the hazards in that space. So we're pulling together tidal and nuisance flood information as part of the space. We also want to make sure we represent the full range of flood conditions, especially from storm surge, so we don't so especially in terms of critical infrastructure, we don't miss out on some vulnerability and exposure there. So we'll be leveraging data to have a representation of storm surge from extratropical to tropical storms across the high frequency to the low frequency space. So this data is going to come from primarily 3 sources. One, we are working to leverage some data products that the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flood Resiliency has developed for some statewide assessments of exposure to tidal and nuisance flooding. We're also actively talking with NOAA to understand if there's been any updates to the products used there that we could possibly bring in here. A source of the storm surge information, the primary source of that will be from the FEMA Regional Flood Insurance Study update and the storm surge modeling that was done for that. And that provides us with a high resolution representation of probabilistic storm surge across the entire state from a common data source. And we'll augment that for some future conditions scenario considerations with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers North Atlantic Coast Comprehensive Study. And we'll speak on that for a moment later. One of the first things we have to do here as we consider the future conditions is incorporate sea level rise. And fortunately, the state's already made some efforts to identify what scenarios it wants to address as it plans for these conditions. Those are identified by Virginia Institute of Marine Science and also represented in the Coastal Master Planning Framework. What we will do is be aligning our efforts with that guidance. We are in active conversations with Molly Mitchell at VIMS to talk about how best to implement that in this framework. And we've also spoken with Billy Sweet at NOAA to talk about any other spatial products and representation of the scenarios in a spatial context across the entire state that may help, that NOAA may be working on for that. So as these are products that will be summarized in the near future, and we'll provide those out to the Commonwealth and TAC for feedback and approval before we proceed in this part of the analysis. One aspect we have to address is the future conditions, and as we take these sea level rise scenarios and we take the existing flood information, what does that look like for future flood condition and how we look at it in terms of exposure and risk. For the purposes of this study and the time frame, we have to take a relatively simple approach, but it is an approach that's used in many of these type of efforts nationwide and probably worldwide as well, I would say, is what we simply add the sea level rise scenario to the existing flood values. We'll certainly do that for the 2040 scenario. We believe that there's an opportunity to bring in some of the amplification of storm surge from sea level rise into the 2060 and 2080 scenarios for the storm surge conditions, leveraging dynamic probabilistic modeling that is represented in the Army Corps of Engineers North Atlantic Coast Comprehensive Study. We can derive a sea level, what's called a sea level rise factor from that, and use that on those conditions. That modeling aligns very well with the 2060 scenario, and is a minimum condition we consider for 2080. And again, this is an approach that we employed in Virginia Beach. Hampton Roads Planning District Commission is also using a similar approach for this for some tailwater values, and it's an approach recognized by entities such as the National Highway Cooperative Research Program. Again, approximating those future hazards in that manner is needed because of the study time frame, but there are other approaches where we can get more robust information that considers the whole of the system and how it may change flood values in the future. To do that, one item that is in our scope is to develop a conceptual approach for dynamic flood modeling in the future. And here I want to illustrate what this means and what it would be comprised of with this image. It's a source pathway receptor framework image. And what we want to represent and acknowledge is that the coast as a whole is a system where the floodwaters and how they get to the built environment is dependent not only on the features between the floodwaters themselves and how this is changing. So as sea level comes up, it raises the water level, but long term that also has impacts on the barrier island. It can lower it, it can degrade, it can breach. This changes the pathway of flooding to built environment and to the back bay environment. Again, marshes can degrade in time and take away their function as how they slow the floodwaters down. And this is certainly something we've been looking at hard in Virginia Beach. And we can see that over time, the degradation of these systems will allow floodwaters to come more frequently and more faster and result in deeper floods. So what we want to do is have a modeling framework where we can look at these individual pieces, examine them, include them in the modeling effort, and make sure we include them in how the flood hazard will change to the built environment. And the other thing we don't want to forget about is rainfall is changing. And as we get to these coastal communities, the compound effect of that rainfall and these elevated water levels can really result in drastic changes in the frequency and severity of flooding. So we will look at how we could possibly include that in this framework. This is a product we'll develop. We'll consult the TAC subcommittees as we develop this, and especially in terms of data and how it could support and other needs. And we'll provide this to the Commonwealth, who after receiving it will figure out how to proceed with that framework in a future iteration of this effort. I'll now turn it over to Matt, who will take us through the impact assessment approach.
Great, thanks, Brian, and good afternoon, everybody. So if you'll go to the next slide, Brian, our objective here in understanding impacts builds on the characterization of the hazard that Brian just spoke of. And again, for our November, the focus is in the tidal nuisance space ranging to the storm surge component, with the acknowledgement that the precipitation element is an important aspect that needs to be grappled with a bit down the road with that framework document that, or the concept document that Brian just talked about, providing direction and a roadmap to that. So with the hazard characterized, the goal of this particular task is understanding how that, that impact manifests in sort of three broad areas. One is on people, and so characterizing that that social landscape in terms of population and demographics and socioeconomic considerations. So we're able to give focus to underserved communities and populations and how that evolving hazard will affect that component. The next impact type we'll be capturing is to the built environment or built infrastructure. So this represents not only buildings and structures, but also key sectors ranging from national defense to manufacturing and critical commercial infrastructure, as well as transportation, other components. And then the third aspect of impacts we want to capture is in the ecological system. So natural infrastructure is how the framework talks about it. But again, thinking about important bioregional and ecosystem elements in the landscape to evaluate that impact. So in order to do that, next slide, please, we've got 3 primary subtasks, a data gathering effort, which is in progress, which yields the approach for the impact assessment, and then finally being able to summarize the outcomes of that impact assessment in multiple ways. We think this is really important for that storytelling component and being able to build advocates for the information that the plan provides. So folks understand where they should put their shoulder to the proverbial boulder and move things along in terms of projects. So let's just start with a quick overview of these subtasks. So the next slide is the data gathering. Here we really wanted to share some of the key principles behind our approach here, ensuring that the data that's used and employed here is findable, accessible, interoperable to the maximum extent possible. The slide here presents a vision for how the information employed for the analysis gets documented and recorded in a Jupyter notebook. We're suggesting that this might be an effective form, again, to ensure that further on down the road and that others are able to truly trace how the different components came together and what they rely on. So with that data gathering in place, we will turn to that impact assessment. Again, we're looking at these 3 components with the people obviously thinking heavily about using the American Community Survey, data from census, which is obviously at this point on the verge of an update. So thinking about how to modularly represent that component of the landscape in such a way that as census data updates, we'll be able to make updates in a timely manner as well. But again, looking very closely at that demographic landscape from a number of lenses. On the ecological systems front, we obviously are, as Brian noted, beneficiaries of a lot of great work done across the Commonwealth, VIMS at ODU, and other participants. So we'll look heavily to rely on that characterization of ecological systems across the study area as the basis to characterize that set of impacts. And then the final piece is looking at critical infrastructure. And again, we're using here the CISA cybersecurity and critical infrastructure framework in thinking about sectors. Here may be a little bit difficult to read, but there's 16 sectors here represented, and obviously not every sector is represented in every geography, but we want to think very closely about how these sectors are represented across the geography and ensure that we are capturing them with this more expansive definition of critical infrastructure, moving simply beyond traditionally like emergency services perhaps and defense industrial base, and really thinking about what drives the economy in different parts of our area of interest. So that's how the impact assessment it will be framed. And so at that point, we'll be in a position to summarize that risk. We're using this nested geographic aggregation approach, which starts really at assigning population and demographics at the building level, and then being able to aggregate at the jurisdictional level, the town, and then within the PDC level, and then within the master planning districts. And so by building that sort of nested geography and aggregation approach, we're able to undertake different slices and tell, we think, compelling stories about both the impacts and potential solutions. So with that, I will pass it to Dale to talk about that strategy identification approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Just talk briefly about the project identification and project prioritization effort that is now underway. A step-by-step process here, but first we're going to work with the TAC and the Commonwealth to better define what is and is not a project, and that generally is going to relate to how much preliminary planning, design, and engineering has been done, and what phase it's in, and whether it's ready to go or not ready to go. We're going to work on defining key project attributes and then a ranking for those attributes. Then we're going to leverage, for project identification, we're going to leverage the existing project databases. And there are a number of those. The PDCs and the regional commissions have some wonderful databases. VIMS has wonderful databases. Wetlands Watch, Conserve and Adapt Virginia efforts, and the Coastal Zone Management efforts. Again, there's a wealth of information on possible projects that we can pull from. And then if we need to solicit or gather new ideas, we can certainly work with the TAC and the project identification subcommittee. We do have some charrettes planned here with stakeholders, so we can gather new ideas from there. And if necessary, we could do a quick gap analysis to see what projects are needed. We'll then have to filter those projects. There's probably far too many, so we'll filter out duplicative projects and projects that may be worthwhile but are beyond the Coastal Master Plan scope. We'll look at a filtering method for project impacts and benefits that achieve the master plan principles already discussed. We'll look at data availability on the project, see if we can do something with it, and also on project status. We'll remove projects that are already funded or in construction. And then we'll go through an alignment process to make sure that the filtered projects align with the attribute criteria and can get a ranking through the attribute ranking. And we'll look at characteristics like the project type and subtype for structural risk reduction, non-structural risk reduction, nature-based solutions or nature-based restoration, socioeconomic outcomes, and geographic and regional dispersion and balance and project balance. Then we'll move through a prioritization effort. And again, here to want to stress the need, the desire to make sure we align with and achieve the 5 master plan principles. We hope to be able to move through a quantitative assessment where possible. We do think that given the patchwork nature of the current coastal Virginia resilience planning efforts across the Commonwealth, quantitative prioritization may start small in this master plan iteration, but it needs to and should grow over time. We'll also set up a qualitative assessment process, again, using qualitative criteria that will achieve the master plan principles and or balance of outcomes across those principles. We do see a possible need at some point for expert evaluation. We're quite aware that the Commonwealth and the TAC do not lack for coastal resilience expertise and capacity. That's a wonderful benefit in Virginia. So when the quantitative and qualitative assessments are insufficient, or when we need to subject those assessments to critical review, the expert evaluation process can and should fill those gaps and meet those needs. And we also imagine, where needed, participatory scoring mechanism, assessment mechanism. And here we'll suggest a dynamic scoring and project outcome weighting process that can be used to gather a wider set of viewpoints or to validate the quantitative, qualitative, or expert evaluation assessments. We'll note, I think, that this prioritization framework is really going to start simply. That's advice we got from the project evaluation subcommittee, but we do think this framework should evolve and deepen towards more quantitative and qualitative assessment capabilities in future master plan iterations. We note also that there are temporal and spatial challenges related to this assessment and this framework, again, on data availability, data consistency, planning and regional capacity, and risk, impact, and benefit assessments throughout this process. Those are not surprising. We have seen those in Louisiana with the various iterations of the master plans that we've worked on down there. We've seen them in other efforts. I imagine Dewberry saw those in Virginia Beach, but these will be resolved over time. and as the master plan process evolves across the future iterations. And I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Deepa. Oh, sorry. To Caroline.
Yep, great. Thanks so much, Dale. So now we're turning our attention to a critical piece of this plan, which is how do we pay for these projects? So on the right of this slide are the main components for the funding and financing task. And a lot of great work, as others have mentioned, has already been done, but especially by the members of the Finance Subcommittee, particularly Wetlands Watch. And I'll show that in the next slide. So we'll be expanding upon that work. Wetlands Watch has created a funding database where they've started to track a number of federal and state and local opportunities and have included certain parameters. So our first step will be to conduct a gap analysis of applicable funding sources available from federal, state, local, and NGOs, and any new initiatives from presidential actions in 2021. We'll be enhancing the database to include additional funding source parameters we want to track, including level of effort, timing, so forth. And we'll be coordinating early with the project identification team. The schema on your left depicts the critical steps behind analyzing funding sources to determine their viability. We start with the source itself. We'll be looking at what eligible project types are allowed to apply, what's the amount of funding available in these grant or loan programs. If applicants are even eligible for these different programs, what are the requirements for application? Are there any matching needs, and what are those limitations? What are the timing? This will change the game across the board that we'll have to look at carefully when on the calendar year we can apply for, the Commonwealth can apply for these programs, and what also is the level of effort. A key step will be examining how these funding mechanisms impact vulnerable populations. So we'll be looking at whether or not funding programs target equity into their eligibility. Are there obstacles for accessing funds for economically advantaged communities? What initiatives from the Biden administration can benefit from these communities, since there's been a particular focus on environmental justice? We'll also be using our experience with innovative financing mechanisms such as environmental impact bonds, resilience bonds, and green banks to determine viability for the Commonwealth and for local governments. We'll be working closely with the Finance Subcommittee throughout. We'll be utilizing many of the existing resources that have been created to date, such as VIM's Vulnerability Viewer, as well as their mapping programs and examining funds received to date across the Commonwealth toward building a more resilient coast. The next major component of this task will be using our database of eligible funding options. We'll turn to aligning these funding sources across these projects that have been identified. And while this might seem straightforward, we recognize the challenge behind deeming which sources are more appropriate and whether or not funding sources are available based on timing and eligibility. We'll be working with the Finance Subcommittee to obtain their insight on past challenges with any of these options. We'll share our draft project and funding alignment with the TAC to obtain feedback and identify challenges and successes in the past. The next slide is just a glimpse to see what has been done already by Wetlands Watch. Just some great work here that is starting to map out timing, fund names, sources, links straight to reports, the amounts. So I think this dynamic table will be, or this database will help track the critical components of funding sources and will be utilized for completing our final list and when mapping across projects. So now I'll turn it over to Johanna, who will be discussing the master plan.
Thanks, Caroline. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the kind of outputs of this work. And so all of the components of the technical study process described by my colleagues will pretty much find their way into one or more of these 3 primary output types. So first, there's the master plan itself, and this is the document that will build off the framework and the technical study, and will present an overview of the process, but really focus on the key results. And so showing the context, the hazards, the impacts, the projects, the funding pathways, all while showing that at the state level, and drilling down where relevant to the master planning regions, and also kind of outlining the path towards implementation. And with this document, we really want it to be visually engaging, easily navigable, and really accessible to just a wide array of audiences, and also a wide array of education levels. So really accessible. Accessibility is definitely a key thing here. And that will be complemented, of course, by the technical appendices, which will go into a lot more detail around the different study process steps and results in ways that might not be the most relevant to the wide array of audiences that the planning document itself will be aimed at. And then that will both be complemented by a database. And so that's really setting up a lot of these findings for just a wide array of applications. So making sure all of the projects, the impacts, everything that's kind of mapped and evaluated and will be summarized and presented to some extent in the document will really be able to live in a way that is structured in a database that can be viewed in applications. So right now we're looking through the requirements of this, thinking about different users and use cases, and how that will inform both the structure of the database and the application. And this element will be a lot more of the kind of living, living output type. So as projects evolve or change, or there's updates, this will be a lot more readily updatable than elements of the document itself, which might go through more of a formal update process over time. And with that, pass it on to Deepa to talk about our outreach.
Thank you, Johanna. So we have developed a comprehensive outreach strategy that solicits participation through multiple avenues and provides opportunities for participation at various stages throughout the process, all the way up till November. So the engagement efforts and outreach materials are tied to project milestones to keep various stakeholders informed throughout the planning process. So in terms of the outreach goals, we are looking to provide an educational component that is incorporated into all parts of the outreach process, depending on the audience. We're also looking to introduce the Commonwealth's efforts regarding sea level rise and climate change. And then finally, identifying the stakeholders' biggest hurdles and most pressing needs. So we will hold meetings at the local level, introduce the CRMP, gather perspectives on how the localities perceive the effort as a benefit to them, and then also capture any negative perceptions. We will discuss additional opportunities for involvement via the subcommittee meetings and also the meetings that are open to the public. We'll be looking to conduct interviews with key officials, business leaders, and centralized stakeholders, again, to collect perspectives and to inform messaging for the meetings down the line to the local governments. In terms of, we will be developing a survey to gather insight on how localities perceive the effort as a benefit to them. And then we'll be looking to coordinate with local chambers of commerce to reach the local businesses. We'll also be targeting the underserved populations. We'll be looking to working with the NGOs to expand our reach to those populations. The way we were looking to define underserved are communities that are below the poverty line or use English as a second language, senior citizen communities, communities of color, and then also vulnerable communities, which are risk hotspots. And for these communities, we'll develop an outreach toolkit to distribute to the NGOs along with the survey instrument. The toolkit will contain a project, for example, a project summary, flyer, meeting information, relevant social media tags, messaging information, preferred release dates, and then any tracking information templates. Our meetings will be aligned to the broader needs of the project. So depending on where we are with certain milestones, we'll identify certain timelines for each of those meetings. The heavy lift is going to be in the next 4 months, starting with the one-on-one interviews with various stakeholders. Also, there'll be social media outputs, there'll be blogs, and then going into the summer, we'll start looking at the underserved communities and reaching out to the military stakeholders and businesses and so on and so forth. We'll be looking to working very closely with the outreach subcommittee to provide us with a lot of the points of contact for each of these stakeholders that we're identifying. And we'll be looking to working with all of the subcommittees to identify stakeholders for the one-on-one interviews. Next, please. So in terms of other tools that we will be using, we'll be looking to update, provide information to update the website. Also social media, as I mentioned, Facebook and Twitter, in-person or virtual events in terms of meetings and open houses, also survey information gathering tools such as surveys. And we will have a participation schedule mapped out to identify what parts of social media or what parts of these different tools we're going to be using on a monthly basis, on a bi-monthly basis, once in 3-4 months, or even ad hoc. We'll also be looking to develop an effectiveness tracking tool to identify which regions have participated to date, the number of people attending meetings, completing surveys, communities that are not being that are not represented, so we can leave information for the state to as they move forward with the next phase. Especially identifying those communities that we've tried to reach out to, but have not been involved. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Deepa. We want to, oh, sorry. 2 last slides, and I think we'll turn it over to the question and answer session. One thing we want to cover is our TAC engagement. I think you've heard from folks as they've gone through the presentation, and there's been a lot of work by the Commonwealth and ourselves as we've kind of spun up to get up to speed on this study and integrate with the committees. We are actively working at doing that and have had the pleasure of meeting each of the committees and participating and listening in on their calls. Some items that we have definitely identified for interaction with are refinement of some of the approach elements and getting input on those. How can we get access to certain data sets we may be having trouble finding? The project identification process and identifying these disparate databases of projects that do exist out there for the most part, and the input on the prioritization factors and how they will be implemented in the framework, and iterative review of our products and plan as we move forward. With that, again, we're working actively with the Commonwealth to fully understand this process and integrate it in our process to make sure we all have the opportunity to have input and feedback as we move forward. And the last slide is just a quick overview of some progress activities that the team's undertaken since we've come on board. I'm not going to read these one by one because I think we're a little long on time for the presentation and would like to pivot to the question and answer. But if there's any questions on these, certainly I think we can address those to Ann Phillips and we'll respond as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to the question and answer and turn it back to you, Admiral Phillips. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Dewberry and team members for your time this afternoon and for this excellent presentation. For everyone on the call, the members today, we do have about 20 slides for question and answer right now. So if you have questions, you can raise your hand, and our very capable assistants who I should have thanked earlier in this case, and our Sea Grant Fellow, Sheree Zhang, will either find your hand in the participants list, since there's 87 people in there, or let me know that there are questions.
Hi, Anne, we have
for vision planning and consulting. Who's talking? Who's talking?
We have a question from Louis Lawrence in the chat.
Yes.
Would you like to jump in?
I would like for Deepa to expand a little bit more on how or what your thoughts are for defining the spatial boundaries for communities.
That is a good question. We are still working on that. I don't have an answer for you just yet, but a community in this case could mean a neighborhood. It could mean 3 or 4 neighborhoods. It could mean a street. So based on the criteria that we're developing for what we're calling as, for example, underserved communities, we will start looking to see where these areas are, and then hone into specific areas that need the help and what we would consider underserved. So it can range from anywhere from a neighborhood to parts of a neighborhood. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's kind of broad at this moment.
Yeah, a follow-on to that. I assume your intention is going to be to link that spatial area back to the various grant program requirements, because defining or labeling a community that cannot access the resources doesn't achieve a whole lot other than just pointing to an area and saying there's a problem.
Brian,
yes.
Yeah, no, I was about to say, yeah, Louis, this might be more of a question for Matt Mampara and Caroline Whitehead, but Matt, I think, is ready to provide some thoughts in response to what you said as well.
Yeah, I think, Louis, you're making a great point in terms of what that applicant or sub-applicant, depending on the source of the resources, is needs to fundamentally be able to connect to the project areas. But I think understanding the risk exposure at a more granular level does really help shape the narrative that should inform the community in seeking resources.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer for that question.
I'll just add that we will be examining the application requirements for each funding source, and when it comes to what's the definition of an applicant in more detail, we'll be taking that into consideration quite closely to see where funding might not be accessible because of the way communities or counties are defined.
Thank you, Matt and Caroline. Thank you, Deepa, as well.
Thanks, everyone. We have several people with their hands up, starting with Mr. Bob Crum. Bob.
Yes, thank you, Admiral Phillips. Admiral Phillips, Secretary Strickler, this may be as much of a question for you, but also for Mr. Batten and the consultant team. First off, for the DoVery team and the entire consultant team, very impressive approach, compliments of the comprehensive nature that you're taking, and very, very excited about this process and the expertise that you're bringing to this. Secretary Strickler, as we look at this, obviously the consultant team, fortunately you hired the best. They have a very, very tight deadline. 50% draft in June, and then moving towards the final draft in the fall. My question is the relationship between our 7 subcommittees and our consultant team, and what that relationship looks like, so that our subcommittees, and many of us being members of those subcommittees, want to do the best job we can of helping the consultant team advance their work. And obviously, with a very tight time frame, not any time for missteps. So the one and I don't want to call it a concern, but the one concern that I'd just like to strategize is, if as subcommittees we go in a different direction with ideas and concepts that are not in the same direction as the consultant team, my concern is that that could cost our team time, efficiencies, and we're not being the most help to them in terms of providing them input that they can use. I just have a recommendation for consideration, Secretary Strickler, but I wonder if the consultant team could provide each subcommittee 2 or 3 questions that we could respond to, that you could sort of direct us to where you need our input. That would structure our input to be focused in a way that's most helpful to the consultant team and hopefully keep them moving in a good way on this very tight time frame. So Secretary Strickler, Admiral Phillips, thank you for giving me the chance to just raise that. But I just wonder if that isn't worth a conversation at this point to make certain that we're all in alignment.
So I'll jump in first, if I may, Mr. Secretary. Bob, thank you for your question. We and we is the contractor Dewberry and Company, and Matt Dallin, the Virginia Community Master Plan Program Manager, and I have been working with Dewberry on how best to convey information to subcommittees where we need their input. We had a preliminary list of questions for Project ID, Project Eval, and the Outreach Subcommittee, and then we've come up with more questions for our other subcommittees since then, as Dewberry has put together their concept of how they want to approach this. So literally yesterday we worked out how we want to convey those questions to subcommittees in a way that we think the subcommittees can understand them and include a response time so they don't linger and linger and linger, and the contractor can consider that input and then move forward. And we tested it out with science research and best practices, and so we'll move forward with that. And Matt Dallin and I have been working on that. So it's more than 2 or 3, and the questions will come to committee chairs to review and work with them on how exactly they were ones that we can ensure meet FOIA requirements and other responsibilities and are respectful of people's time as volunteers. But it's taken a little while to tee up a process there. And to get to the point where Dewberry was specific on the kinds of things that they need input on. But we're there, and so those will be arriving soon, within the next week or so to the subcommittees. And Mr. Secretary, that's all I had to offer. If you want to contribute any more there.
Sure. No, just and you're exactly right. And Bob, this is certainly the appropriate question to ask at the appropriate time. And you know, there's a lot of evolution going on in this relationship, and I understand that's caused some confusion, and we appreciate everybody's patience. I think you know, Dewberry has started meeting with subcommittees. We'll continue that engagement, and the more we all talk and exchange ideas, I think the more seamless this is going to become. But you're right, there are a couple of different things going on here. One is the very tight timeline that we have Dewberry and everybody on for producing the master plan, and the need for the subcommittees to engage on specific questions with respect to the consultant and development of the master plan on that tight timeline, and then kind of the broader questions and interests that the subcommittee may have to explore other things that may you know, be important and useful in kind of the broader sense of the master planning process and the continual evolution and updating of the document that we ultimately produce. But that's you know, certainly kind of 2 different parallel tracks there. So you know, I think we've got a good plan for engagement here. But if there are you know, things that you know that you continue to see that are you know, suboptimal, just let us know, and you know, the more we communicate, I think the better off we're going to.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Dr. Karen McGlathery has her hand up also. Karen?
Yes, thanks. This is a question for Deepa. You mentioned working with NGOs to expand the reach and communication with underserved populations. And I was wondering if you could give some examples of what organizations, what NGOs you're thinking about working with and how they'll help you reach those populations.
So we are in the process of putting together a list of NGOs. If you give me a minute, I'll be able to pull it up. And what we're looking for them to do is possibly, use the surveys to get information, looking at options like door-to-door canvassing, looking at attending local fairs and festivals and other community events and gatherings, depending on the schedule and where we are in the next few months, having representatives from these communities, in these communities, going out to them and pulling that information. This is going to be in addition to the meetings that we are going to be conducting that will be open to all of these communities with the underserved populations. So if you can give me a minute, I will pull up the list of
And so you'll, just as a follow-up, Deepa, you'll, your metric of whether you're reaching who you need to reach will be based on what the demographics are in an area and who's actually you're connecting with through your surveys or through your meetings.
Yes. And I think we'll have a better idea once we develop our list of underserved communities to first we have a target number in mind, and we don't know if we're going to reach them depending on the schedule. But of those, we want to be sure that the ones that we are reaching out to, we get the participation we're looking for through these various channels. So that's the reason why we're having these different options of having meetings, having information available, having surveys, door-to-door surveys available at community centers and libraries. So at any given point, people have the option to participate if they choose to. If we can take the next question, if you don't mind, I will come back to the list of NGOs.
Certainly, thank you, Deepa. I don't see any other hands up for the moment. Does anyone have a question? I don't have anything in chat, and I don't know if there's any attendee questions that might be in chat.
This is Reggie Tuppence with the Upper Mattaponi Tribe. I'm not seeing a hand raise function on my screen here. I was wondering if I could jump in with a question.
Please, Reggie. Thank you.
And so just a little bit of background. I'm the tribal administrator for the Upper Mattaponi Tribe. We're located in King William County. We also have the Pamunkey Indian Tribe in this county, who is federally recognized as well, and the Mattaponi Tribe, who has state recognition. Both of those reside on state reservations. There are 7 federally recognized tribes in Virginia. The 6 of us in the eastern part of the state are all tribes that lived on the water. Many of us have properties that are threatened now by sea rise and by climate change, especially at this moment, the Pamunkey and the Nansemond. So I guess my question is, what is the intent to consult with the tribes on a government-to-government basis? Thank you.
And before we respond, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Certainly. So first, thanks to Mr. Tuppence, who has agreed to be a TAC member and participate in this process in that way, in that formal way, representing the Upper Mattaponi Indian Tribe. We have engaged with the RTOC Council, where Mr. Tuppence asked some excellent questions, and that's actually the precursor for how he came to be a part of this process, and will continue to do so. And a number of our TAC members have also worked with the tribes, including the Coastal Zone Management Program, and continue to do so in a number of different ways to ensure that we are working directly with them in the consideration of how they are being impacted by coastal adaptation and protection needs in their future. So I'll let Brian respond to Dewberry's piece, and I see Mr. Secretary Strickler is on too. So we want to continue that dialogue in the way that is most appropriate, and we'll look to your advice, Reggie, and that of others, other tribe members from other nations, to tell us what best ways there are that we can interact with you directly and ensure that you're a part of this throughout and into the future.
Yeah, if I can just jump in quickly before Brian. Reggie, thanks for the question. It's an incredibly important one. You know, as Admiral Phillips said, we are more than willing to do anything that you all think would be helpful for engaging our federally and state recognized tribes. You know, if we're if we're not doing something, we're not communicating with people we need to be. You know, just let us know, and certainly we'll look for your and welcome your guidance on that topic.
I think what I would add to the conversation here is that, Reggie, we really appreciate you bringing this up, and we'll be sure as we work through the outreach effort and looking at communities, entities, and organizations to engage with and hear from, we can certainly make sure your organization is considered in that. And some other items too that we have been going on through our thought processes as we look at the overall prioritization framework and how best to consider some cultural and historic resources within that framework within the state. And it is a consideration that is ongoing by our team.
I appreciate that. You know, I guess I'm kind of playing several roles on the TAC. I'm trying to, you know, I speak on behalf of my tribe, but I also try to represent the best interest of the other tribes, the federal and state recognized tribes in Virginia. And I don't always know what the other tribes are doing. The RTOC, communicating to the RTOC, is really good because there are representatives for each tribe on there. And through that, I guess, would be the best mechanism to talk to the other tribes to see, you know, do they want to have that direct government to government, or do they want to work through their RTOC on that? But just to give you an idea of what we're working on, just recently I was in Williamsburg with my natural resources coordinator with National Park Service, and we have a site there that's eroding away, and there's remains that were found, which is a really difficult thing for us. So, and that's going to happen more and more often in that area, Jamestown Island, and where our communities were all based along the waterways. So that is definitely of importance to us. So, you know, anything that can be done to mitigate the, you know, the damage, and understanding that things aren't going to change. Water is going to continue to rise, and so on. And then, you know, within actually looking at a letter from my natural resources person now, we're getting ready to submit a grant to the Bureau of Indian Affairs for a climate change vulnerability assessment. So it'll enable us to get some funding to look at doing a tribal resilience program, so we can start looking at our specific areas of concern. So it would be really important for us to be able to partner and potentially share data and so on. My natural resources person is a GIS expert, so we have a really good person in our department here, and we're building out. Some tribes are a little bit more advanced than others in what they're working on. Pamunkey's had a head start, and I know that they're working on a lot of areas as well, but it is definitely of importance to all of us. The impact that it has on the fisheries, you know, we're water people, the sturgeon, herring, shad, and all were very important to striped bass, but also the land-based deer and other game, and then the cultural sites, you know, as well. And many of our tribes, even if we weren't located on the bay, we traveled to the bay. The Mattaponi, the Treaty of the Mattaponi in the early 1600s was actually done out on the eastern shore, Old Rappahannock County. So our area was fairly extensive. But I appreciate your time. I don't want to take too much, but I just wanted to voice that so I represented the other tribes well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing all this up today so we can capture it, make sure we consider it in what we do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reggie. I still don't have any other questions in chat. I don't see any other hands up. Bob, your hand is still up. You have a question, or is that a holdover, Mr. Crum? Not hearing anything. There are no more questions. We can now move to the next part of our agenda, which will be hearing updates from subcommittee chairs.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. Thanks to all the folks from Dewberry for that presentation, and certainly look forward to next steps and further engagement with the TAC and the subcommittees. The first subcommittee update presentation is from the Project Identification Subcommittee. Mr. Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. I think Bob's question about coordinating with Dewberry was really critical. And as such, what we've, through the Project ID Committee, we've had to pace ourselves a little bit slower to make sure that we didn't end up in a direction that was incongruent or incompatible with the work of Dewberry. So at the last meeting, what we were tasked with doing was looking at a couple of the state plans that have already been put into play, and then looking at how they organized projects into what we're calling topical buckets. And we've sorted those out into about 12 different topical or thematic buckets with about 60 sub-project categories underneath of that. So we've got that organized. I've shared that with Dewberry. I've not sent that back to the project subcommittee yet because I want to make sure that it is aligned with the direction that Dewberry wants to move in. So we still need to have a conversation, a little bit more robust conversation with Dewberry about the work that we've done to date and how that aligns with the direction that they are going in. And then once I can figure out whether or not that makes good sense for us to share what we have done, then we'll send that back to the committee. So I think the timing now is right where we need to have more of a substantive conversation about which entity is in front of which entity and how are we going to continue to move forward. So that's all we've got to report from our committee.
Sorry about that. Great. Thank you, Louie. Appreciate the update. Next in line is the Project Evaluation Subcommittee. Dr. Hirschner.
So our committee has met with Dewberry briefly. They agreed to share some of their preliminary questions with us. We too, like Louis and his group, are concerned about exactly how we fit into all the things that are currently in play. So the committee has listened to not only Dewberry, we received another presentation from the RAFT group that's working on their PREP tool, which is the self-evaluation for resilience projects tool for localities, trying to make sure that, or trying to understand what the crosswalk is between that tool, what Dewberry's doing, what we were doing, and then also looking at the Community Flood Fund Preparedness Fund project criteria, which are out in draft form right now. Again, looking to see if we can provide useful comments to Dewberry, to the RAFT team, and back to DCR and the flood preparedness group. So the team is reviewing some of those materials now. We hope to have preliminary comments back to Dewberry within a week, and we're scheduled to meet again in 2 weeks.
Got it. Thanks, Carl. And I apologize. I didn't pause questions for Mr. Lawrence for his subcommittees. Does anybody have a question for Louis or Carl? All right, I'm going to assume that that means that there aren't any questions, but if we want to come back at the end, if anybody thinks of anything, we can certainly do that. Next up is the Finance Subcommittee, and Elizabeth Andrews is the chair. So Elizabeth, we'll go to you.
Great. Thank you, Secretary Strickler. As you just heard in both Louis and Carl's reports, I think we're all in a similar mode in that we have had an initial meeting with Dewberry that was helpful, and we're all trying to figure out what the different roles are. Our next meeting is on Monday. We had a meeting in March in which we had speakers come from DEQ and DCR and VRA, and it was organized by our Vice Chair, Peter DeLema from VRA, and it was very helpful to hear about existing Virginia funding opportunities. And how are they easily or not easily aligned to be used for resilience efforts. On Monday, we have guest speakers that we're very excited about. Eric Letzinger, who's the CEO of Quantified Ventures, is coming to speak about environmental impact bonds and resilience bonds and catastrophe bonds and pay for success programs. And we have two people coming from the state of New Jersey, David Rosenblatt, who's their resilience officer, and Fawn McGee, who runs their Blue Acres program. And they'll be talking about those programs. It's particularly helpful to hear from New Jersey because they had a Green Acres land acquisition program they told me it's been 60 years now, and they melded into it their Blue Acres program because they had pre-existing staff to handle land acquisition issues. And so they just incorporated into that acquisition of properties as flood buffers. So it could be that there are some lessons to be learned for Virginia from that. And so they'll be coming on Monday. We're excited about that. After that, we had an initial schedule that the subcommittee adopted for topics for each of our monthly meetings that reached into September. But that was in February that we adopted that before Dewberry had even been selected. And so on Monday, we're looking forward to further discussion with the Dewberry representatives at our meeting to figure out exactly how best to tie in our efforts. We do have already invited and scheduled for the May meeting a number of speakers about federal funding opportunities, the Corps of Engineers, HUD, FEMA. And so that should still be very informative to hear about those programs and how they can benefit Virginia. But I think we're somewhat in a pause mode until we all have a discussion on Monday with Dewberry, because if you looked at Brian's slide that he presented, the funding and financing part comes in a little later in their timeline. And so we need to coordinate on how we get to that point. I think that database development was like July on his slide, and then finalizing options in September. So we're looking forward to further discussion. I do want to note that the chart that Brian showed that does have various funding options in it that Wetlands Watch put together that is helpful. It was actually funded by our Coastal Zone Management Program. As you know, they were on the front edge of all of our resilience efforts for some years now. And so we'll be looking at that as well, but I don't think it's quite finished being vetted yet by the localities, so it's not on the streets yet, but that will be a good tool for us to access as well. And we're looking forward to providing whatever Virginia-specific feedback and information to Dewberry that they might find helpful as they're collecting information on funding options.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. Any questions for Ms. Andrews? Okay, great. Next up is the Community Outreach Subcommittee, and Chair is Ashley Montgomery. Ashley, you're up.
Thank you, Secretary Strickler. So the Community Outreach Group was able to meet at the beginning of the month of April. We were able to have that meeting with Dewberry, and just kind of echoing the comments of everyone else, we were able to kind of align our thinking and try to understand how we're going to build out that collaboration. So I know our committee does look forward to further refining how we'll be collaborating with Dewberry. So we did share with Dewberry and let them be aware of the work that we were starting for the outreach committee. And that was a portion of that is documenting our outreach networks. And that's part of identifying those NGOs and other organizations that can help us reach into the communities and the populations that we don't typically tap into. So we'll be working with Dewberry to further expand that outreach network to make sure it's a holistic process. We also talked about developing a tool that could help our outreach process be sustainable. So not only serve this iteration of the master plan, but also serve all other efforts in the future. And that's just a part of our mission and our goal to have engagement be done in a meaningful way. So our next meeting will start to think through what messaging will be and how we can start to frame a narrative around messaging. And that'll be in our next meeting at the end of the month. Those are our updates. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. I know, there's a lot going on in the outreach and messaging space. And, I think the Dewberry team has a draft document that they'll want to share with you all relatively shortly that we've had a chance to take a quick look at, and kind of some overarching messaging concepts as well. So look forward to continuing the work through your subcommittee. Any questions for Ashley? Great. Okay. The Studies, Research, and Best Practices subcommittee is up next. Dr. Rob Weiss. Rob, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm a professor. I have to have slides, otherwise it won't work. I'm sorry for that. So we've discussed quite a bit. We formed working groups. They are the Relocation Handbook Group, according to our charter, a group on natural and nature-based solutions, which might have a different name very soon to include other solutions as well. And then we formed a socioeconomic equity group to define chairs for those groups. Most of the interactions within those groups are going to take place in FOIA-compliant email interactions, but all the groups have scheduled public meetings in the next few weeks. And what I want to mention is that thanks to the academic institutions participating and some other entities, we have a group of three or five students and interns that will do the research-related legwork, so that we don't have to do that. And that will be led by Shurui Zhang from the governor's office, which is really cool. And they've been doing some work already, especially Shurui has done some work with respect to the relocation handbook, looking at other states, what they have done, and collecting some data. We're developing an expert and advisor database, which will be very handy as soon as we get, and we have already received some questions from Dewberry, and to distribute them across sort of an array of experts in a meaningful way to receive quick feedback and meaningful feedback. And also advisors, then they will help hopefully with the working groups. We've started out in terms of membership with our subcommittee, but we went beyond. If you want to self-nominate, I'm talking to all of you now here on the call. If you want to self-nominate to be part of that advisory and expert database, please send me an email, or if you have anybody who you think should be under advisory, please email me at weiscr@vt.edu. That's the best way, and I forward you a small email to give us feedback on it. Lastly, I want to talk briefly about the subcommittee meetings. Our last meeting was on the 12th. We took the full 90 minutes. We had a talk by Dr. Anna Maria Bukwich from my university about her research on relocation, which was very informative. And the next meeting is going to be after all the working groups met in May 10th. And there's nothing else other than to invite you all to that subcommittee meeting. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Rob. Any questions for Dr. Weiss? All right, hearing none. Up next, the Federal Installation Partnership Subcommittee and Captain Thomas Krabs. Captain Krabs, over to you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. Good afternoon, everybody. We met today, and we have settled on a purpose statements before you, and we're really looking to build that federal coastal resilience and understanding what those needs are and where they meet best and most productively at the intersection of local, tribal, state, private, and federal stakeholders. And we hope to develop a model that is a governance model that is repeatable and achieves the shared goals of all of those in the spaces where the interests intersect. Next slide, please. We're broken down into 3 buckets of lines of efforts: awareness, alignment, and action. At our meeting today, we heard from the Corps of Engineers, the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation, and the City of Hampton Roads along our awareness track. But I'd like to make the point that because of the timeline, and even without the timeline, all 3 of these items are really complementary. We're approaching them all together. They will interrelate, and we'll land on the action items and aim to produce those for integration into the overall plan. Next slide, please. And just an example of our lines of effort. Here they are for awareness. Next slide, please. Alignment. And finally, action. And at the end of the day, looking to develop that model, that governance model that delivers local, tribal, state, private, and federal strategy and investment to execute a pilot project as an overlay so that we can actually test our model. We are looking forward to collaborating with Dewberry, and I'd like to second Bob Crumb's suggestion. I think it's excellent as we move forward, and I'll definitely be talking to Dewberry about that. And we're also collaborating with other subcommittees. In May, we plan to be helping out the Finance Committee with Readiness Environmental Protection Integration briefing, a Defense Critical Infrastructure Program briefing, and Sentinel Landscapes briefing. So we're looking forward to continued collaboration with the other subcommittees. And pending any questions, one final remark, we meet the third Wednesday of every month. Our next meeting is May 19th. And now, pending any questions, that's my report. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tom. That's really helpful, and good to see y'all are pointed in that right direction. Any questions for Captain Krabs? Okay, hearing none, the final subcommittee is aligning economic development, and Sarah Dunnigan. Sarah.
Hello, all. My report is similar to some of the others. We had a good conversation and meeting with Dewberry. Again, the purpose of our committee is to recommend a process to better align state, regional, local economic development efforts with the priorities and goals of the resiliency plan. Our committee had been working on a strategy to get a baseline understanding of how well existing efforts were either informed or aligned with the priorities or goals of the plan. And to that end, we had been working on a survey instrument as well as a list of stakeholders, and we're particularly interested in a kind of a subgroup of stakeholders, and those being, individuals and entities who have primary responsibilities for economic development efforts. After conversations with Dewberry and understanding more clearly our committee's connections to some others, particularly outreach, we are probably going to take a different tact and collaborate and partner with the outreach subcommittee and potentially others, and maybe refine our approach to get that baseline understanding. Our next meeting is coming up this Monday, and we will be continuing to work with Dewberry and obviously tweaking and pivoting some of our efforts to make sure that we're making kind of the maximum contribution in the areas we've been assigned. That's my report.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Appreciate the update. I think these reports will continue to kind of grow in size and length and substance as we get a little further down the road of coordinating amongst the various subcommittees and Dewberry. But it seems to me like we're off to a really good start here. I mean, there obviously are always going to be some adjustments and growing pains as you get into something with this many moving parts. But I'm really pleased about the way that it sounds like all the work is going. So thanks again for everybody's efforts and leadership in the subcommittee work. Are there any final questions or any discussion before we move on to the next section of the agenda? Okay, a quick scan shows no hands. So I will move into our last kind of large agenda item here. I'll be fairly brief, but I do want to give an update on several initiatives that we have underway that will support the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. I gave updates on these the last time, and I think it's probably wise to just continue to do this every time, because there have been some fairly important developments since we last met. First, as many of you all probably know by now, Virginia participated in its first regional greenhouse gas initiative auction at the beginning of March. That auction brought in more than $19 million for the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. As you all know, 45% of the RGGI revenues go to that fund. The other 50% go to energy efficiency programs through the Department of Energy, and then 5% to DEQ for additional climate mitigation work. We have a draft grant manual out for a grant round that would propose to spend the majority of that money on resilience-related projects, both in the coastal zone and farther up inland along our rivers. The grant manual is out for public comment right now, and we anticipate opening the grant round. The first grant round by June. Our objective would be that each time we get a slug of money from RGGI through those quarterly auctions, we would follow that up relatively quickly with another grant round, so that we can kind of be looking at applications and queuing up projects to accept on a quarterly basis. The current grant manual incorporates some, or actually all, of the master plan principles. There are things that are broadly applicable not just in the coastal zone, but also for river and flooding as well. But as some of you all have noted, this is happening before we have a completed master plan. So just want everybody to be clear that while we want to go ahead and get some of this work started, manuals that are released after completion of the master plan are going to focus on identified priority projects in that master plan document for the portion of funds that go towards coastal adaptation and resilience. So we will have synergy there, but we think it's important to go ahead and start getting some of this money out the door in the immediate term, and a lot of that is going to be for planning, frankly. Assistance, technical assistance for localities that need help getting their kind of resilience efforts off the ground and synced up with what we want to see at the state level. So this is great news. At the current pace, we're going to see approximately $75 to $80 million into the Community Flood Preparedness Fund this year, and while that's not going to meet all of our resilience needs, it is certainly not nothing either. So it's I think going to be a good amount of money to get some of this work started. Second, the Department of Environmental Quality is continuing to accept public comment on a draft regulation to incorporate climate change and sea level rise considerations into its implementation of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. This comment period was open the last time we met. It's a 90-day comment period, so a little bit of time left there, a couple more weeks. The goal here is, as you all know, is to ensure that the Bay Act buffers, the resource protection areas in particular, can protect water quality while at the same time facilitating climate change adaptation and resilience. So that's not the easiest line to walk, but it's something that's really important to do. And we're sifting through public comments as they come in to try to tee that up for a vote at the State Water Control Board on a final regulation, a revised regulation in June. And finally, the Marine Resources Commission recently closed its 30-day public comment period on draft updated guidelines for its tidal wetlands program with a focus on living shorelines and protection and enhancement of important coastal green infrastructure. This, as you all know, was born out of legislation that the General Assembly passed, Senate Bill 776, 2 sessions ago now, to get to strengthen our living shoreline protocols and update this important guidance. So the guidelines are going to be tied very closely to the DEQ Bay Act regulations to ensure that we have smooth management of the protected resources in the land-sea interface, and will be that action will be before the full Marine Resources Commission for a vote at the May meeting. So those are the updates on those 3 items. Does anybody have a question or a comment on any of those processes?
Looks like Mary Carson Stick has a comment. Do you want to go ahead and jump in?
Oh, I don't have a comment about what Secretary Strickler just reported out. I was just making a clarifying comment about the database in reference to what Elizabeth had said about the resource being vetted by local governments. So no need to repeat it. Everybody can just read it. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks, Mary Carson, and also thank you and Skip and the group that you all have been working with that has been providing us a lot of really helpful feedback on both the DEQ and the VMRC processes. I think we all understand that these are really important things to get done, and I feel good about us being able to put together final drafts of these documents that make them stronger thanks to you all's help. So appreciate that assistance.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Seeing no other requests for questions or comments here, I just want to note that we want to kind of keep on a regular meeting schedule. I think we're doing a good job of having these every couple of months. So we're going to shoot for our next TAC meeting to be in the latter half of June before we all break for the 4th of July. And we will follow up from this meeting very shortly with to poll some options for meeting dates. So that's what I have as far as updates. Admiral Phillips, do we need to do anything to transfer or transition into the public comment period, or can I just say that the floor is now open for public comments?
I think you can say the floor is now open for public comments. I believe there was one that was signed for in advance. Katie will know who that is.
Yep, Charles Steppard is the only person we had sign up. Charles, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead.
Charles, I'm going to introduce Charles. He's my shipmate, and he is also Congresswoman Elaine Luria's director in the Hampton Roads region in her home office. Charles, thank you for attending today.
Great. Yeah, and thank you so much for inviting me. I don't have any questions. I just want to offer my support for everything that you do to see if there's any federal issue or any way we can get any support from the federal level so I can look into it for you. So I'm at your service for anything you need from the federal department.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Steppard. We certainly appreciate it and certainly appreciate everything that Congresswoman Luria is doing in this space as well. And we've certainly got some ideas. I think between the two of us, Admiral Phillips and I have testified before the U.S. House of Representatives Transportation and Infrastructure Committee at least 3 times on federal support for our coastal resilience initiatives in Virginia. So have a lot of good ideas there, and I know you and Ann are in close contact. So just please keep us posted on developments on the Hill, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Okay, hearing and seeing no additional requests for public comment period, I would like to suggest that we adjourn the meeting. We need a motion and a second.
I'll make a motion. This is Denise Nelson.
Thanks, Denise. Is there a second?
This is Bob Crum. I'll make that second.
Thanks, Bob. We have a motion properly seconded to adjourn the meeting. Admiral Phillips, we can do this one by voice vote, I believe.
Yes, Mr.
Okay, great. How I'm going to do this is, unless I hear somebody say nay within the next 10 seconds, we're going to adjourn. All right, I think that's a pretty decent 10 count. Thanks again, everybody, for being here today. This was really great to catch up and hear about all the good work that folks are doing. And now that we have Dewberry on board, I think we've got the whole team pulling in the same direction. So exciting times, and look forward to catching up again soon. Thanks a lot. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.